Hello, this is John Cleland again. I'm producing an addendum to my original transmission system model database video that I put out on YouTube. As you might recall, if you viewed the first video, near the end of that video I stated that I really didn't intend to go any farther without some encouragement from someone. And of course all I'd really gotten done was buses, lines, both impedance and ratings, and I indicated via this screen here all the different things that were still left to do: generators, transformers, zero sequence mutuals, dynamic stability data. There was the diagrams and also base case creation. The truth of the matter is that I generally know how to accomplish all of these aspects, but there's one item in this list that at the time I really had no idea what I was going to do with, and that is the diagram. When I wrote the TVA FOG program about 15 years ago, at the time the best I could do with diagrams was to create plot files that had XY coordinates for buses and lines and transformers and generators and how big to draw buses, etc. But these had to be edited manually. And then there was a several step process of going through that you ended with an AutoCAD impedance diagram. But these diagrams were totally independent, and there was no interactivity between the user and the diagram other than editing those plot files at the front. So in the days and weeks after I put out the original video, I guess you'd say I had an epiphany or a aha moment. I began thinking about the diagram that I could plot, and over those few weeks between then and now, I've written additional programming inside the program, inside the database management program, that performs diagram drawings. And I think you'll be very impressed. It's interactive. And this video is to show you the additional work that I've done on the transmission system model database since my original YouTube posting. In an attempt to keep my video as short as possible, I'm going to begin with a diagram that I've already drawn and just show you the various capabilities of my diagram drafting in the program. This, as you'll recall, is pretty much a representation of the sample system I was using. 1/500 line, 4 161 kV lines. Now in the draw screen there are some buttons to the left. The button draw simply draws a simple line. This is a simple line right here. It's drawn, has x1 y1 coordinates, x2 y2 coordinates. You can change the color. You can change the weight. Let me put it back where it was. The dot is just a simple dot. If you want to make a connection point, you can make a connection point and put it right there. And actually it is it and the draw are both in the same table. The only difference between it and a drawn line is that it has 0 x2 y2 coordinates. You can move this around a little bit. If it happens to be in your way, you can move that around. And this is a close. However, I've got it set to automatically close anytime you pick something else. Text, this is a text right here. It's nothing but a text. If you double click, you get the ability to edit the text and the actual location. And as you could see there, you can delete any of these things. But this is a bus right here. When you left click the bus, the first thing you get is a little pop-up that gives you all the information on the bus number, name, and in and out of service date. Now these drawn lines, the buses and the transmission lines all have the ability to be moved and expanded or whatever. What happens is I've given you the ability to pick either just within 10 or 15 pixels of the one end of the line or 10 or 15 pixels of the other end of the line to move it, or if you pick anywhere else, you move the whole line. And when you move the line, I've got it set up such that the name that goes with, this is a bus, the name that goes with the bus always moves to a point just off the to end of the bus. That's so you won't lose it. Let's suppose you moved it way over here and that Baltimore thing stayed where it was. You might get lost a little bit. So it always moves with you, but then you can move it a little bit. And when I open this, you can see the bus that it's associated with. You can see it's X1, Y1, X2, Y2 coordinates. The color, you can change the color just like on the other one. You can change the draw width, but for buses and lines, you can leave it associated with the kV, and in this case, it's a 500 kV bus, which will be this size right here. You can change the color of the font. You can make the font red if you want to, or you can make the font bold, or you can make the font bigger. Let me go back to roughly the starting size, or I don't remember what the starting size was. And then there's the location of the text. If I move the text, you can see that the text numbers change. Then I can also change the amount of information that is given in that. Here's the maximum: bus number, bus name, kV, and angle. And here is the minimum. You can actually suppress the bus name, but you can always get it back by double-clicking that and changing your selection on the bus properties. There's also a B dot, which is just like the dot, except it's a dot that is associated with a bus. Line, these are lines right here. Let me move, and that's a line. Let me move one of the lines out to the side a little bit and show you some of its characteristics. And again, I can move this. Let's move it right over here where we can see it right beside it. There's your X1, Y1 coordinates. There's the line that it's associated with. You can change the color. The width is, I've got it set defaulting to kV, and that's a 500 kV line. There's also varying equipment. I can use nothing at one end of the line. I can put a switch at one end of the line. I can put an MOD at one end of the line, or I can put a breaker at one end of the line. I also have the same thing happening in the middle of the line and the same thing happening at the end of the line. So I can actually shorten this line. Let's suppose you were doing a node branch model. I can shorten the line and give it a switch on one end, a switch on the other end, and a breaker in the middle, and that might look like a bay at that point. But let me change it back to what it was and get it back where it was. Oh, I grabbed too close to the middle, didn't I? Okay, then there's next. I'll show you next in a few minutes. You can clear the drawing entirely and start all over again. But if I don't save it, the drawing is still just like it was to start with. Let's see, what else do I want to show you about the oh, I didn't show you the information that goes with the line. I can turn it on. It's set for suppress right now. I can do bus numbers and names, bus numbers only, bus names only. Let's change it back to everything. If I move the line, just like the bus information goes with the to end of the line information goes with the middle of the line. So if I move the line, if I move either end of the line, the bus information or the line information is going to change, and I can then move it wherever I want to. Again, I'm trying to avoid losing the information that goes with the line when I move the line. But let's put it back where it was. One other thing to show you, I have actually an imaginary grid set up on this screen. And you can set it at 1, 5, 10, or 20 pixels. And what that says is anytime you move something, in this case it's set at 10, anytime you move something, you can see it jumping. It only moves to the nearest 10 pixel, evenly divisible by 10. Now the text, all the text moves in one. It doesn't have anything to do with the grid. They move just independently. But all the buses, the drawn lines, and what this does, it helps you position it. See, I can easily position it where the end of that line is connected to that bus. Furthermore, it helps you, if you want to do a straight line, it helps you position the line such that the line is either perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. Now again, I can change this to 1, and you'll see that it's moving very continuously now, but the problem is I might have a little trouble making it a level line at this point. But if I set it at 10, it's easy to make a level line, plus it's very easy to locate it. Now let's look at some real exciting stuff. As I've said, these lines, for example, that line is connected to this line in the database. Well, I've got it set up such that if you right-click the line, you actually open the edit screen for that line. Of course, I've got a skeleton. I don't have any, in this particular version of the database, I don't have any impedance or rating information in it, but you can see, and also buses, if I right-click the bus, I can edit the bus. Now let me show you something that's really exciting. I'm going to close this line, or close this diagram. I've got another diagram defined, which is the Baltimore, Washington number 1 and number 2 161 kV TL. And it's empty at the present time. But if you'll recall, in the original sample system, the Baltimore, Washington number 1 line was going to be tapped in 2014, and this diagram is defined for 6/1/2014 to 12/31/2099. Let's draw this diagram from scratch, and I'll show you another very exciting ability of doing this. So I'm going to hit the bus. I'm going to associate it with the Baltimore 161 kV line. I'm going to put it in position. I'm going to do, this is going to resemble kind of the Telegear web console, I think. Let's put the Baltimore bus in there. Let's put the Washington bus, Washington 161 kV bus. And again, if I want to edit that bus, the information with that bus, I simply right-click. Now I'm going to add the line number 2, which is not going to be tapped, Baltimore, Washington line number 2. If I want to, I can put a number 2 beside it. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Say 12. No, that's too big. Let's say 10. Make it bold. So this is Washington, Baltimore, Washington number 2. And I'll leave the information on the line for right now. At this point, I need to add the Baltimore to Annapolis tap to Washington, and Annapolis tap to Annapolis. Well, I don't have any of those buses or any of those lines in the database, but I can add them from here. So let's add the Annapolis tap. That's a dot. I'm going to add the Annapolis tap. I did that wrong. I want to do new. And that bus number is 537796. It's a load flow bus. It's 161 kV, and that's all I'm really going to do just to get it in there. Save. I'm going to put a sample note here. Okay, at this point I have the Annapolis tap point. You can see I have that bus. It's now in the database. If I right click, I can edit that bus. It's in the database. Let's add the Annapolis bus 537797. That's a load flow bus, 161 kV. Save. Give it my note. Now that's the Annapolis. Make it kind of small. Move it over directly. I may have to move it again in a minute. Move it over more or less directly above the Annapolis tap. Now I need to add the 3 lines. The new line is 532701, which is Baltimore, to 537796. 537796. Annapolis tap, circuit 1. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm not going to do a whole lot of information with regard to it. Just get it in the database. So now I have that line in there. Let's just go ahead and move that connection right there. And that connection right there. That's not horizontal, is it? Let's add the Annapolis tap, 537796 to 537797. Circuit 1. Save. Save. And that goes right here. Going to shorten that a little bit. And then finally, the Annapolis tap, 537796 to 544621, Washington, circuit 1. Save, save. And I'll place it. I'll place this in right here, and I'll place this in right here. Okay, now, so I have created a new diagram, but in the process of creating the new diagram, looks like this line's not very horizontal, is it? In the process of creating the diagram, I've actually updated the database. And again, I can edit those lines or edit those buses by right-clicking. I'm going to save this. And now that I've got it saved, if I want to draw it again, there it is. Now I'm going to finish one other thing on this drawing that I didn't do when I went through it the first time. That is, add the switching at the ends. Switches at the tap point. I believe this end is the from end on this line. Okay, now I'm going to do one other thing just to show you. I mentioned the next button. Let me show you what that's for. I'm going to edit this diagram here, which goes from 1/2010 to 12/31/2099. I'm going to duplicate this diagram, and I'm going to take it out of service at May 31st, 2014. Now I have two versions of that diagram. One of them is the original. Let me get in the drawing mode. One is the original diagram. The other one is empty, but I'm going to duplicate this diagram So now this diagram is identical to the other diagram. But now this line right here doesn't really belong on this. So I'm going to move this over. I'm going to reassign this to the Baltimore-Annapolis tap. Maybe shorten it. I'm also going to put a bus at the end of it. Let's see, I need to change the switch at the end. And I also need to add a bus dot for the Annapolis tap. So there's that tap point. Let me save it. Now I have two Baltimore 500 to 161 substation drawings. One of them ends May 31st, 2014. The other one begins June 1st, 2014. Now let me go to this diagram, and I'm going to put a next. Next, I'm going to say, well, I'll go ahead and put it down here. I'm going to say that if I want to go back to the Baltimore 161 kV bus drawing, I'm going to assign it that diagram. Now actually, I got to assign it this diagram. I'm going to save. I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to put a next on it. That goes to the Baltimore-Annapolis tap. I'm going to put it right here. Let me save these. Okay, now if I'm in this diagram, I can hit this button, right? Well, actually, if I simply click it, it tells me what the next diagram is. If I double click it, it opens up the editing or the properties box. But if I right click, it completely closes that diagram and opens this diagram. Or I can go back by right clicking that. I can go back to that diagram. Now there is another button on here that looks a little bit like what you see on your TV remote, which just simply says go back to the previous diagram. So I can cycle back and forth between the two diagrams using that button. Now these two buttons don't do anything yet, but what I intended for them to do was at some point, if I had a particular diagram with multiple years, this would be available to go the next date range out, and this would be to go to the next date range back. But I haven't done anything with that button yet. I've only done this button here, and I've gone and I've given you these next buttons to go back and forth. So ideally, let me go back to this one. There would be a button here, which if you clicked, you would get the Pittsburgh drawing. If you right-clicked this next button, you'd get the New York drawing. And this one, you would get the Washington drawing. But of course, there are none of those drawings at this point. The only drawings I can go back and forth between are the Baltimore 500 kV substation drawing beginning in 2014, which is this one, and the Baltimore to Washington lines, which is this one. Now I've got just a little bit more to show you. This is a previous version of the program, 3 or 4 iterations ago, but I've got some diagrams in it that I drew at the time that I wanted to show you. One is what I call the ring bus. Now let me mention that ideally and ultimately a program like this would have diagram validation such that any lines or generators, etc., that you draw in the drawing that don't belong by either mainly by date or whatever, there would be some errors generated that tell you you've got some lines on there that don't belong. There would also be a test somewhere that says if you forgot a line. But in this case, I have no diagram validation in process, and I'm reusing buses up a storm, and I'm reusing lines up a storm just for illustrative purposes. But I've drawn this in the form of a ring bus, and these are buses. Of course, these are buses. These are drawn simple lines, just used as line stubs. That's a line stub. This is actually a line, and that's a line, of course. And another thing that you might want to do in a drawing like this is you might want to put some bus dots in. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that one. I'm going to just put it off to the side for a minute. I could delete it, but I'm going to put a dot. I'm going to make it, let's see, that's the right size. I'm going to just put some dots, just what you might want to put some dots here and there just to help you understand where connections are. Just to make the drawing, and the only reason for this on this drawing is that there are places where the line crosses a bus and you don't want to get confused as to whether there's a connection there or not. So you could put all these bus dots or these connection dots in at the locations where, and you notice how easily the grid, the 10 pixel grid, helps me position these things. I think that's all of them, but you can put all your dots in if you want to. I'll save this, why not? Then here's a version of it I call the transfer bus. Let's suppose the Baltimore 161 kV bus were a transfer bus. Not only that, let's suppose that you were building a database that was node bus or node breaker rather than bus branch, and such that you had specifically, so here is a line, and here is a line. That would be your spare line, and I'm pretending that there's only one spare line breaker, and I'm using it over and over and over again to connect from the bus to the line side of the main bay. And let's suppose that the rating for this version of the spare breaker is different from the rating for this version of the spare breaker. So you might actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 branches or node breaker models in the database that are out of service solely for the purpose of these spare breakers. And of course, this is a line. Of course, again, I'm reusing lines and buses up a storm just for illustration, but this might be another way that you might show something that is more along the lines of a node breaker model, full topology model. One other thing that I want to show you is that I have in the draw version, you can draw, you can move, you can do whatever you want to. However, I also have a view version, and I can view all these drawings in the view version, but I can't do anything to it. I can't move anything, but I can look. I can actually open and edit lines and buses as I please, but I can't modify the diagram itself. I can only view it. So that's about all there is to show you. I know I went through some of it kind of fast and was kind of disjointed at times, but that's just the way I do things. You'd be surprised how long it takes to produce one of these little videos, especially when you run into bugs during the process and you actually got to stop and modify the program to get rid of the bug. But at any rate, I hope you found this interesting. This may be the last thing I do on the program. I don't really know, but I got so far on the original program and quit, except I couldn't just get it out of my mind. What was I going to do about diagrams? And this, I think, is my answer to diagrams. So take a look. I hope you enjoyed the video and appreciate your interest. Goodbye.